Okay, I just finished Sitka's Linguists on the history of elk calling. And I also just spent all night recording 3 bull elk bugling outside of our property here in Southwest Montana. So I wanted to give you a test. Here are 6 different calls, bugles, essentially, all similar in nature. 3 of them are from the real thing. 3 of them are created by humans. 2 of those humans are some of the best buglers in the world, Corey Jacobson and Joel Turner. And the other is a friend of mine who can vocalize with just his own vocal cords, and probably one of the best imitators of all sorts of wildlife I know. So this is your test. I'm going to play each one of these. You get to decide which one's real, which one's fake, maybe guess which one's Corey. I couldn't find anything from Steve Ranella that was available, but maybe Steve will watch this and send me his, and we can do an analysis of it. After you listen to these, I'll actually give you my take on what's going on in elk communication theory as a linguist from my perspective, and maybe some tips that can increase or improve your elk calling capabilities. So here we go. Number 1. One more time. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. So I forgot to mention one of these real elk calls is actually from the documentary Linguists. I would highly encourage you watch it. If you want to find the answers to the questions, you can skip forward to the end of this video. Or if you want to learn a little bit more about what these spectrograms, these pictures mean, and how to use them to interpret elk bugles and what we do and don't know about elk communication and how that might impact how you try to improve your calling. You can watch the rest of this video. Otherwise, just fast forward to the end and you'll get the answers. So last night I was up for about 6 hours recording 3 bull elk calling back and forth around our property. Right here on the north entrance to Yellowstone Park, where the northern herd and the Paradise Valley herd kind of commingle, essentially. Here is where our property is and where I'll play back a recording for you. What's cool is this is just a 40-minute recording shown in a spectrogram on Adobe Audition. And each one of these little blips here you see across this 40-minute recording is a bugle. So you can see these elk were going at it for a good 40 minutes. It was actually for 6 hours, but I've just cut out this particular section. And then I'll show you a particular recording. So I don't know if any of you have seen the Sitka short film called The Linguist about some of the history of elk calling and some of the greats in that industry. But I thought it was a little presumptuous that they used the word linguist. So I figured, let me do a deep dive in to see how good these guys are really at bugling from a linguist perspective. To start with, these are 3, different languages right here. The first you recognize, I made her duck. The second here is a chickadee. So that's the sound. And then this is a spectrogram. It's how we turn animal communication or other sounds into text, essentially. And just to give you an idea, if you've never looked at a spectrogram before, over here on the left, on the y-axis, is frequency. So that's the pitch, high or low. And then on the x-axis is time, so over time, pitch over time. And then the darkness of the lines here, the intensity, is essentially the amplitude or the volume. So you get to learn 3 things by looking at this, and it's kind of our way of transcribing sounds into something that humans can look at. And the third text here is this clay tablet from 5,000 years ago. And what do these 3 things have in common? Nobody knows what they actually mean. We have hints and we know a few things, but we still have not deciphered this text over here. We kind of know a few things about the chickadee call, but we really don't know much because we hear it a lot in the different contexts with presumably entirely different meanings, but maybe similar meanings. And then why don't we know what this sentence means? I made her duck. Well, do you mean I made her duck down, or did you make her some duck soup? So they have that in common because we don't know the context. I would argue here's a bull elk right in Mammoth, close to where we live. And here's the call. And here's the spectrogram of that particular call. So do we really know what this means? We can imitate it, we can call it back, but do we know what it means? Well, let me give you a quick primer again on the spectrogram. So this is a spectrogram of that same elk bugle. And I'll point out a few things. Here's the frequency over on the right in hertz. I'm not going to get into the details of sound here, but there's a couple really good internet sites that talk about how sound works that you might want to look into if you're trying to improve your elk calling. But here's a frequency, and this is what we call the fundamental frequency down here at the bottom. It's the primary frequency we hear. And when elk bugle, they'll usually do that anywhere between 2 and 3.5 kilohertz, that fundamental frequency. And then we have harmonics that go up the scale. And to give you a sense of what I mean by harmonic, let me just play the original elk call. Okay, and then I'm going to run a filter, and I'm just going to play this fundamental frequency here. Then I'm going to play this second harmonic. First harmonic. And then I'm going to play this harmonic. Now you have to listen really close. Okay, high pitch, right around 7.5 kilohertz. Now I actually had to increase the amplitude on that for you to hear it. My ears are getting to the point where I can't hear in that 8 kilohertz range, and you hit your 50s, that's often the case. But those three sounds are actually in the call, in that elk call. It's just that they blend together. Here at the beginning of the sound, we hear that typical low to high pitch rise, and then the flat call, and then the drop off. But right here, over here at 5.8 seconds roughly, you see this lower frequency, this fundamental frequency down around 200 hertz. What a lot of people don't know is elk are pretty rare in the mammal species in that they can do two frequencies at the same time. Now, birds essentially do the same thing. You've heard of their syrinx probably before. So here's a bird's syrinx. Grabbed this grouse that my dogs and I got, and this trachea tube, and then it divides into each bronchial tube. And right there, kind of in that middle spot, is where essentially the vibration happens in a bird's voice that produces the sound. And each of those can be controlled separately. So you can produce two different frequencies at the same time as a bird. You can see that here on this X-ray. So you'll start to see it vibrating. The bronchial tubes are down here, and each one can vibrate at different rates because the bird can blow wind out and control the muscles that control this trachea and expand and contract them accordingly. So what's really weird about elk is they can do the same, but we don't totally know how yet. So back to this call, right down here in these low frequencies at the end of a call, it's usually where we'll talk about maybe the grunt or the guttural part of the bugle, is this 150 to 200 hertz fundamental frequency, low pitched portion of the call. And then this is the higher pitched portion. So now I want to do a test. I took two of the world's most famous buglers around today, Joel Turner and Corey Jorgensen, and then a friend of mine who bugles with his own voice, right? Totally with his own voice. And then I put in three actual elk bugles from that particular night, and then one from the actual Sitka documentary called The Linguist. And I'm going to play each one of them, and I want you to guess which one is made by a human, whether it be a physical call or from the human's voice, and which one was made by an elk. So I'll just go from left to right and down the series, and I'll play each one, and then I want you to know 3 of them are real elk and 3 of them are humans. And again, I'm comparing the spectrograms, which you just learned about, and you can see the frequency over here, 1K up, 1K up, and then you can see what's in the particular call. Okay, so let's start with this one. Okay, let's do another. Again. Okay, the fourth one. And I'll just stop for a second. You'll notice, right, you can hear that low frequency call and then you can hear the high frequency call in these calls, but we're going to come back to that in a second and see whether or not they're really good imitations or not. One more time. Okay, and last one. Okay, so there are the 6. Let's come back to that in a second. So I'll tell you which ones they are. So I mentioned earlier that we still don't know how that higher pitched frequency is produced physically in an elk's vocal system. Here in the middle, you've got the stages of a bugle from A to H, and broken down here below. And we see again that spectrogram. And you can see that low frequency call right here, and then the higher frequency call right here. So I'm just pointing this out to show that these are the stages of the call and how the bull is actually moving its tracheal and its mouth and its nose in conjunction with that. Now up here, I want to show you 4 different calls from actually 4 different bulls, and point out that each one of these is different. I don't want to get in the details too much, but a lot of times researchers call this higher frequency the G0 and the lower the F0. But what they're pointing out here is when the low frequency part of the call starts varies in different calls. There's not a lot of research on whether it varies by bull, within the same bull, across maybe a group or a herd, like a Paradise Valley herd versus the northern herd. Are these dialects? Are they idiolects? Do they mean anything? Do they mean something different? Do they mean, hey, I'm ready to fight, or keep your distance, or these are mine? We don't know. But I'm just pointing out that there's a lot of detail in the particular call that no one really talks about, because elk can do 2 frequencies at the same time. Now, what's fascinating is we still don't know why. Now, the lower frequency comes from essentially an elk's vocal cord. So here's the trachea and here's this flap, right? And that vibration of that flap creates that lower frequency sound, and that sits way down in elk's trachea, and they can actually extend and make that trachea longer and move it up and down in their throat and get that deep sound. Now, there are 2 theories right now as to where the higher frequency is coming from. One is that it's being modulated via the nasal passages, right? So air is coming out of the nasal passages. The other is it's being modulated through the mouth, and this little constriction that happens near the epiglottis, which helps divide, right, where you swallow food versus where you breathe. And that helps direct a small portion of air out into the mouth that bounces off the top of the mouth and creates this disturbance, this flight disturbance, and that whistle, the whistle sound, the high pitch sound. So again, I'm just summarizing this. There's still more research. There's actually research going on right now in Yellowstone Park as to what might be causing this. But it's just a great example to show you that we're not linguists yet, is what I guess I would say with elk calls. And most important, we don't totally know what all the meaning that's in there in those calls. So hopefully this helps, and get out there and just spend more time listening and watching and observing, and maybe getting your own recordings and seeing how your calls match up to actual calls and figuring out how you might vary that low pitch versus that high pitch. And who knows, maybe one of you is going to invent the next great elk call that factors in both frequencies.